All right, so a couple of weeks ago, millions of people around the world had the opportunity to experience an incredibly meaningful collective grief ritual. Can anyone guess what it was?
Eclipse. Was it when the artists who came out from their mission?
Yes. So Artemis 2 was the space shuttle that was going to the furthest side of the moon. And when they finished their lunar flyby and came back around, mission specialist Jeremy Hansen radioed mission control, and he said that he described the two craters that they had found on the far side of the moon. And then he said, we began this journey, this astronaut family journey, many years ago. And along the way, we lost someone that we loved. And he went on to say, her name was Carol, spouse of Reed, and daughter, mother of Katie and Ellie. And then as his voice shook, he said, it's a bright spot on the moon, and we want to name it Carol. And I still get like choked up when I think about it. But it was, before he even got those last words out, all the astronauts floated together, and they hugged, and they cried. And I would say that most of us who witnessed that moment were also crying back here, 250,000 miles away on Earth. And what we all got to share in that moment was a grief ritual. And it was simple, it was profound, and it was meaningful. And you might be thinking, well, of course it was profound. They literally named a part of the moon for her. But what I want to say is that shared grief rituals don't have to be name the moon big, right? They name something on the moon big. They just have to be something that is meaningful, that creates empathy and connection between people. And I got to hear another part of their press conference yesterday, and somebody asked Reed, what did it feel like for you when this happened? And he said that what made it meaningful, yes, the part about actually naming this crater for his wife, but it was the fact that they had these 3 other crew members, his astronaut family, had come together and talked about this and brought it to him and said, this is something we want to do. And that, in that moment, they not only were holding the pain of his grief and their grief, but also the possibility of something beautiful coming out of that, right? Because this particular crater is on the border between the far side and the near side of the moon. So it means that even there are times where it will be visible from Earth. And so that's something that's really special. And it really shows us the power of these kinds of shared rituals, which is what we're going to talk about today. Now, the grief ritual that was witnessed by the Artemis crew, or that we witnessed the Artemis crew go through, was not, or it had to do with the loss of a loved one. But what we know is that grief does not begin and end with death, right? We grieve a lot of different things. There's all kinds of pain that the world just doesn't acknowledge as grief. And so in his book, The Edge of Sorrow, Francis Weller talks, or The Wild Edge of Sorrow, Francis Weller talks about these as little deaths. And so these little deaths are accumulated moments that we experience throughout the course of our lives. And it's everything from, a relationship ending, or maybe feeling like you've been left out of something, to the bigger things like the loss of a loved one. And so we have this whole range of little deaths throughout the course of our lives. And when I read this, it really resonated for me, because part of this is that these little deaths also have to be acknowledged. Just because we aren't acknowledging them doesn't mean that they're not there. And we also know that grief changes us. And so for anyone who has experienced grief, we know that we are different people before the loss happens and after. And so these little deaths begin to shape the lens through which we see and experience the world and our place in it. And so part of what we want to think about is how do we get back to sharing this grief in community? Because we know that when we do this in community, it actually ends up creating a lot more vitality and connection in our spaces. And so while a lot of these little deaths are individual to us, in this particular moment of time, we are also dealing with a lot of shared grief as well, like it's collective. Are there any Taylor Swift fans in the room? Okay. So I will say that we have entered our era of polycrisis. And polycrisis is basically where we have these multiple overlapping crises that we are trying to navigate. And so life is already hard, and on top of that, we are dealing with political instability. We're dealing with economic degradation, so many different things that are happening. And on top of all of this, the world feels a little bit meaner. And the reality is that it is. According to the Institute for Economics and Peace, global peacefulness has been declining for the past 11 years. And I think for women in particular, as we are watching our rights being rolled back, our bodily autonomy being taken away, and then we're watching immigrants being vilified and so many other things that are happening in our spaces here, we are not just experiencing the pain and frustration, fractured trust and overwhelm and all of that, but we are actually experiencing what's known as moral injury and what's known as institutional betrayal. And where these things come together in this era of polycrisis, we're finding collective grief. And it's important because we talk a lot about our frustration, our anger, our disillusionment, but we don't talk about the grief of this moment. And just because we don't talk about it doesn't mean that it's not there. It ends up staying in our bodies, staying in our minds, and then impacting the things that we're trying to do. And so we want to really start thinking about how to shift this so that we can actually move through our grief together. Oops, sorry. So nature shows us this every day. In nature, pain and grief are not personal, they're relational, and healing happens in community. And so when a tree is injured or uprooted, it doesn't try to heal on its own. It sends out messages through the air, through the root system, and then in return, the entire ecosystem responds, all the way from the highest canopies down to the mycelial networks and roots. They start to provide nourishment and stability to hold that tree up until it's ready to hold itself up. And so I often use nature as a way to think about how we come together in community, because I think it's a really beautiful way to think about it. And so the reason that it's challenging for us, though, is because, and I've talked to several people about this today, but I talk a lot about the Industrial Revolution, because while the Industrial Revolution gave us efficiency and standardization, it also really disconnected us from our humanity. Because all of a sudden we were told, these are the times that you work, these are the times that you eat, these are the times that you take breaks and go to the bathroom. And so we started to we stopped listening to the signals that our body was sending us and and our own intuition, and we really started to just try to operate within these parameters. And so that in turn really separated us from our bodies, our emotions, and from each other. And it conditioned us to believe that grief is something that's personal, that we are meant to deal with on our own, right? We're not supposed to burden other people with it, but we're supposed to do it ourselves. And grief and any other kind of messy part of being human is not supposed to show up in the workplace, right? Or in professional spaces. And the idea of professional spaces is also interesting because they are very much defined by patriarchy, right? And so we want to think about how we can redefine this through a matriarchal lens, but that's a whole different talk. So, but the idea is that we move through it efficiently, quietly, and on our own. And so has anyone here ever been grieving something, but you feel like you can't really say that? And so when somebody asks you, oh, like, how are you? Just, because people say that, like, oh, how's it going? You just say, oh, yeah, fine, right? But inside, you're not really fine, right? I think most of us have experienced this. And when that happens, it leads us to kind of put on a mask that we hide behind, and it makes us feel isolated in our experience. And so this is why we really want to talk about shared grief rituals, because as human beings, we are hardwired for connection and belonging, and our ancestors knew this, which is why they created rituals around these kinds of transitional moments. So we are going to do that today. Does everyone have one of these little leaves? Okay. Oh. So I'll bring one to you in a minute. So on your leaf, I'd like you to write something that you are grieving or have grieved. And it doesn't have to be something really big. It can be one of these little deaths that we just talked about, but just something that you're grieving. So I'm going to give you about a minute to think about that and write it down on the paper. And as you're writing, I want you to notice what's coming up in your body as you are writing about this. All right. So I'm going to invite you to just hold that piece of paper, whatever you wrote on it. And if it feels good to close your eyes, you can do that. But I want you to feel what you feel when you're holding your grief in this way. You're actually acknowledging it in this way. So just noticing what's coming up for you. All right. Now I'm going to invite you to take your leaf, fold it in half, fold it in half again, fold it in half again, and you should have a little square. And as I said, trees tend to communicate through messages. So messages sent through the air, messages sent through the root systems. So today we are going to communicate our grief with each other by sending our leaves out to one another. This is kind of awkward because we're in this weird setup here. Normally we do this in a circle, but we're going to put this out, and then somebody else is going to have the opportunity to hold your grief for the moment, and you're going to have the opportunity to do that for someone else. So what I'd like you to do is just, you can close your eyes, you can keep them open, whatever, and I just want you to toss it one way or the other. And just imagine that these are leaves being blown out by the wind. So, and there's people behind you too, so keep that in mind. I know, sorry. Thanks. All right, and we'll do this one more time. Go ahead and toss again if you have one. If you don't, that's okay. Sorry, this part's a mess. All right, if you pick up whatever is nearest to you. Oh. Here, I'll give this one to you. Okay. All right. Did you write something? Yes. Okay. Oh, you have one? Yeah. Does anyone not have one? Oh, perfect. Okay. So I'm going to invite you to go ahead and open what you have in your hand and just read it. And again, if it feels good to close your eyes after you read it, you can do that. But I want you to just notice again how it feels to now be holding someone else's grief. Okay. Would anyone be willing to share what came up for you when I said that somebody else was going to be holding your grief today? Honored? Okay, nice. Anyone else?
I put a bunch of notes behind my grief note, not knowing that we were going to share it. So I was like, oh, they're about to get a lot of notes.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Go ahead.
I got a little anxious, I will say that. But then I was also like, I feel like I didn't put enough information down. So there was a lot of, I felt like self-doubt,
Mm-hmm.
I would say.
Yeah, like that self-doubt, that anxiety of opening that up to somebody can definitely be there. But I also love the feeling of it being something that's like you're honored to be sharing it as well. So yeah. And then what did it feel like to actually hold another person's grief? What did you notice coming up? Did you notice anything?
Compassion.
Where did you feel that in your body? Love that. Anyone else?
Yeah, I just started smiling, thinking like somebody else is the privilege.
Yeah. I love that. Oops, sorry. So this was such a short exercise. It was kind of a mess. And still, like, we feel things, right? And how is it that we end up feeling what someone else is feeling when we don't necessarily know who wrote it? It's something that's written on a piece of paper, right? And the reason that we're able to do this is it has to do with our storytelling. And so there's a whole neurobiology to storytelling. And when we share our experiences and our grief with other people, we are sharing a story. Even if it's brief, even if it's anonymous, even if it's written or spoken, or even if it's watched from 250,000 miles away on a tiny little screen, right? When we share our stories, we connect very deeply with other people. And this is because as we do this, we have these neurobiological pathways that open up. And so they allow us for our brains to synchronize with the other person. And we can start to feel that sense of empathy and connection and the emotions that the other person is holding. And as we do this, our cortisol levels, our stress levels start to come down and we start to relax, and our dopamine and oxytocin start to rise, and we bond in some way with that person. So even that feeling of like I'm feeling teary, right? And so when all of this happens, our nervous system is soothed because it feels safe. And so when we share our grief with each other, we're creating the conditions for something called moral imagination. Moral imagination is our capacity to hold both the pain of this moment and the possibility of something better. And I just want to clarify that this is different from toxic positivity, because toxic positivity is where we're trying to avoid the painful emotion and we try to put a silver line around it and that kind of thing. But moral imagination actually creates the space to acknowledge the pain and then move through it. And this is exactly what we saw those 4 astronauts do, right? Is they didn't ignore that grief was a part of their shared experience. They actually named it, they honored it, they shared it, and they created something meaningful together in community. And so it's really in that space between the pain that we carry within ourselves and then the possibility that we carry together that we're able to stay connected to hope, even when we're in the midst of grief and sadness and pain, especially in this moment of our collective history. So that is it. It's a lot. I put together a little journal that has all the information that I talked about, but also some reflection questions for you to take away. So please feel free to do that. And if you get a chance, come see me out on the side hallway, and I have some fun swag out there too. But thank you so much. Thank you all for the work that you do and your service, and for taking the time to be here with me today. Does anyone have any questions?
Can I record you restating the trees talking? Because I love it.
Which part?
Just like how you said that when a tree is grieving.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Because I've never heard that, and I think that's so amazing.
Yeah, and there's actually a lot of research about this that says that when a tree is injured or there's a rupture, it does not heal alone. It actually sends out messages through the air and through the roots, and then the entire ecosystem responds from the canopies at the top all the way down to the mycelial networks and the roots. They all start to send nourishment and stability to hold that tree up until it is ready to do so on its own. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I went through a very hard loss, so it was very emotional for me to hear you. And the two of you are the reason why I decided to stay and not go home earlier. So I'm glad I did. And what are some of your strategies to take care of yourself while doing this work, which, you know, it can be challenging at times, I can only imagine. So how do you take care of yourself?
That's a great question. So the question is, how do we take care of ourselves when we're doing this work? We were just talking about this. There's so much unlearning that has to happen because we have been conditioned in these kinds of fields where we are serving other human beings that there's this belief that we are willing to sacrifice our health, our well-being, our relationships, everything in the name of service. And so part of this is we have to actually notice when those stories are coming up for us, and we have to start shifting them. And we do that through awareness, like getting aware of like when those stories are coming, how they're showing up in the body, because our body is sending us signals all the time that we often ignore. And then compassion. So we have to practice self-compassion. In these fields, we show compassion for everyone, probably not for ourselves so much. And so we want to start bringing that awareness and compassion together, and then there's the care. So self-care, I think about self-care as targeted micro practices that allow us to notice, like, what is that feeling depleted? So there's different buckets of self-care. And if we can notice what's actually feeling depleted, we can do something in real time just for that. And so I'm a big proponent of micro practices throughout the day rather than one big thing. But then self-care always has to go with collective care. And so I think now more than ever, we have to be coming together in community and together. So for me, like, that's kind of my strategy around it.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the question. Yeah.
I always felt like my default was to figure things out myself. So how did you, I'm not sure if you had a similar situation, but how can I and people similar learn how to connect with their local ecosystem for support versus thinking I have to figure this all by myself because this is something that I'm going through?
Yeah. So, okay, this is not me trying to like get you to get my book, but I promise that. So this is about our shaping stories, and I talk about this like we have stories that were created from our childhood that shape the lens through which we see and experience the world and our place in it, and then that creates our surviving reactions, which includes doing things on our own and not like asking for help and things like that. So what I was just saying about we have to like rewrite those narratives. We have to challenge them and rewrite them. So that, and part of the problem is that we've been doing this pattern for so long, we have those deeply etched neural pathways that we default into. So as you know, neuroplasticity tells us that we can actually change our brains at any time. It just takes like really intentional work to do that, but we can create new neural pathways so that when you then find yourself in that position again, you are able to not default into the old pattern, but actually create something new. And that's where, again, that awareness, compassion, and care come in. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.